The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Seoul Royale Hotel shimmered like frozen stars above the elite guests gathered for the annual wine charity gala. Diamonds sparkled, champagne flowed endlessly, and the city's wealthiest families laughed loudly as cameras flashed around them. Near the center of the ballroom stood Vanessa Sinclair, a rich socialite famous for humiliating anyone she considered beneath her. Draped in a silver designer gown worth more than most people's yearly salary, she swirled her glass dramatically while her friends hung on to every word she spoke. Honestly, she laughed loudly, if a wine isn't older than 20 years, I don't even bother tasting it. Her friends burst into fake laughter. At that moment, a woman dressed in a simple black uniform approached their table carrying a tray of rare French wine bottles. Her name tag read, Mina, *. She looked calm, elegant and composed despite the noisy ballroom around her. Her dark hair was tied neatly behind her back, and her movements were graceful enough to attract attention without trying. Vanessa glanced at her, and immediately frowned. You? Vanessa scoffed. You're the sommelier tonight? Mina bowed politely. Ely. Yes ma'am. I'll be serving the Chateau Margaux Reserve. Vanessa looked Mina up and down with cruel amusement. A black sommelier? She said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. This hotel must really be lowering its standards. The laughter around the table grew uncomfortable. Mina remained silent. Vanessa took the wineglass from Mina's tray and sniffed dramatically. Tell me, she continued mockingly, did they teach you wine tasting before or after street survival lessons? A few guests gasped quietly, but Mina simply replied in a calm voice, the Chateau Margaux pairs best with silence, ma'am. The table fell quiet for a second. Vanessa's face darkened instantly. How dare you talk back to me? I was only offering professional advice. One of Vanessa's wealthy friends leaned closer and whispered nervously, Vanessa, maybe let it go. But Vanessa loved public humiliation too much. No, she snapped. People like her need to remember their place. She suddenly grabbed the wine bottle from the tray and tilted it carelessly, spilling red wine down Mina's white cuffs. The ballroom went silent. Several guests froze in shock. Vanessa smirked proudly. Oops. Mina slowly looked down at the stain before lifting her eyes again. For the first time, something cold appeared behind her calm expression. Still, she said nothing. That silence somehow frightened the room more than anger would have. Then the hotel manager rushed over in panic. Miss Sinclair, he whispered desperately. Please, don't create trouble tonight. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Relax. I'm disciplining your staff. The manager turned pale as he looked at Mina. Miss Han, he whispered nervously. Vanessa blinked. What did you call her? The manager immediately regretted speaking, but it was already too late. Mina calmly placed the tray onto a nearby table. Across the ballroom, the massive entrance doors suddenly opened. Every conversation died instantly. Dozens of men in black suits entered first, moving with terrifying discipline. Behind them walked a tall Korean man with sharp eyes and an unreadable expression. The atmosphere changed immediately. People lowered their voices. Some guests even stepped backward, because everyone in Seoul knew who he was. Kang, Junho, the ruthless Korean Mafia boss who controlled half the city's underground empire, and secretly owned many legitimate corporations across Asia. Even politicians feared him. Vanessa's confident smile vanished. Junho's eyes scanned the ballroom once before stopping directly on Mina. The coldness in his expression disappeared instantly. Without hesitation, he walked straight toward her. Every guest moved out of his path. Mina stood calmly as he approached. Then, in front of the entire ballroom, the feared Mafia boss gently took her stained hand into his. Who did this? He asked softly. His voice was calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. Nobody answered. Vanessa forced a nervous laugh. Mr. Kang, this is all just a misunderstanding. Junho ignored her completely. Instead, he carefully removed his expensive black suit jacket and placed it over Mina's shoulders. Only then did the guests notice the wedding ring on Mina's finger, the same ring Junho wore. A wave of horror spread through the ballroom. Vanessa's face turned white. She's your wife? She whispered. Junho finally looked at her, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. You insulted my wife, he said quietly. Vanessa stammered desperately. I didn't. No, Mina interrupted gently. Everyone looked at her in surprise. She adjusted the jacket around her shoulders before speaking calmly. She knew exactly what she was doing. Silence. Junho's eyes never left Vanessa. You humiliate workers because you think money makes you untouchable. Vanessa swallowed hard. It was just a joke, Mina repeated softly. You insulted my race, my work, And my dignity, because you assumed I was powerless. Vanessa's friends slowly backed away from her table. Nobody wanted to be connected to what was happening. Junho turned toward the hotel manager. Cancel every Sinclair contract connected to my companies. The manager nearly collapsed. Yes, sir. Vanessa gasped. You can't do that. But Junho continued calmly, and inform every partner in our network that the Sinclair family is no longer welcome at any Kang property. Several businessmen nearby immediately checked their phones nervously. Because Kang properties included luxury hotels, shipping companies, casinos, investment firms, and half the elite venues in Seoul, Vanessa suddenly realized the true scale of the disaster. Her family could lose everything overnight. She rushed toward Mina desperately. Please, I'm sorry. But Mina stepped back before Vanessa could touch her. For years, Mina said quietly, people insulted me because of my skin color, because of my job, because they thought kindness meant weakness. Tears formed in Vanessa's eyes. I didn't mean you meant every word. The ballroom remained completely silent except for Mina's voice. When I first came to Korea, nobody would hire me. Restaurants rejected me before hearing me speak. Customers questioned my knowledge before I even touched a bottle. Junho listened quietly beside her. Then Mina gave a faint smile. But one person judged me by my talent instead of my appearance. Her eyes turned toward her husband. The feared Mafia boss looked at her with an expression nobody in the room had expected from him. Love. Real love. He met me when I worked in a tiny underground wine bar, Mina continued. Everyone else treated me like furniture. But he listened when I spoke about wine. Vanessa stood frozen. He returned every week, Mina said softly. Not because of the wine, because he said my voice made him feel peaceful in a violent world. Several guests exchanged shocked looks. They had never imagined Kang Junho capable of tenderness. Mina smiled slightly at the memory. One day he asked me why I tolerated rude customers. And what did you answer? Junho asked quietly. Mina looked at him warmly. I said powerful people eventually reveal who they truly are. Vanessa's breathing became uneven. Junho finally stepped closer to her. And tonight, he said coldly, you revealed exactly who you are. Vanessa fell to her knees. Please. My father's company will collapse. But the ballroom showed no sympathy now. Moments earlier, they had laughed with her. Now they avoided even looking at her. Because power had shifted. Mina watched silently for several seconds before speaking again. Get up. Vanessa slowly looked upward. I won't beg my husband to destroy your family, Mina said calmly. Not because you deserve mercy, but because becoming cruel like you would shame me. Junho glanced at her carefully. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. Let her keep the contracts. Gasps spread across the ballroom. Even Vanessa looked shocked. But, Mina added quietly, she apologizes to every hotel worker here tonight. Personally, Vanessa's pride shattered completely. Yet under Junho's terrifying gaze, she had no choice. So the rich socialite who once mocked workers spent the next hour apologizing to servers, cleaners, assistants, and hotel staff, while the elite guests watched in silence. Some workers accepted politely, others ignored her completely. When it was finally over, Vanessa approached Mina one last time. I really am sorry, she whispered weakly. Mina studied her quietly. Then she replied, learn to respect people before power forces you to. Vanessa lowered her eyes in shame, before leaving the ballroom alone. The moment the doors closed behind her, the tension finally disappeared. Soft music slowly returned. Guests began speaking again in nervous whispers. But nobody dared disrespect another staff member for the rest of the night. Junho turned toward his wife. You were too kind. Mina smiled faintly. Maybe. He brushed his thumb gently across her stained cuff. She hurt you. She embarrassed herself more. For the first time that night, Junho allowed himself a small smile. Then he leaned closer and whispered, you know half the city is terrified of me. Mina raised an eyebrow playfully. Only half. A rare laugh escaped him. Several guests nearly dropped their glasses hearing it. Because the ruthless Mafia boss almost never laughed in public. But around Mina, he became human. He offered his arm to her gently. Dance with me? She accepted. And as they stepped onto the ballroom floor beneath the glittering chandeliers, the entire room watched silently. Not because they feared Kang Junho, but because they finally understood something far more powerful. The most dangerous man in Korea belonged completely to the woman they had mistaken for weak. The orchestra began playing a slow classical melody, as couples drifted carefully onto the marble dance floor. Yet no one truly danced naturally anymore. The entire ballroom remained shaken by what had happened. Every eye secretly followed Mina and Junho. The powerful mafia boss rested one hand gently against his wife's waist, while guiding her across the floor, with surprising elegance. Despite his terrifying reputation, his movements around her were soft, controlled, almost protective. Mina noticed the stares immediately. "You're making them nervous." "Yes again," she whispered. Junho's expression remained calm. "Good," she sighed quietly, though amusement flickered in her eyes. "You enjoy this too much?" "No," he answered honestly. "I enjoy watching people realize they judged you incorrectly." For a moment neither spoke. The chandeliers reflected across the polished floor, while cameras flashed carefully from a distance. Nobody dared approach them directly now. But on the far side of the ballroom, a man in a navy suit watched Mina with growing curiosity. Chairman Lee Min-seok, one of Korea's most influential businessmen, and one of the few men wealthy enough to speak to Kang Junho without fear. "Interesting woman," he murmured to his assistant. "She's changed him." His assistant nodded nervously. "Sir, should we leave?" Chairman Lee smiled faintly. "Number 1, I want to meet her." Meanwhile, near the wine display table, hotel workers whispered among themselves excitedly. "I thought she was just another sommelier. She remembered my daughter's birthday last month. She helped pay for kitchen assistant's mother's surgery, and we almost watched someone humiliate her." One elderly waiter shook his head slowly. That woman never acted superior even once. Across the room, Vanessa sat alone near the exit, trembling as she stared into her untouched champagne glass. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from her father. "Where are you? What did you do? Call me now." She couldn't bring herself to answer. For the first time in years, nobody surrounded her. No fake friends. No laughing admirers. Just silence. Because the powerful guests who once praised her cruelty had instantly abandoned her the moment consequences appeared. Her chest tightened painfully as she realized Mina had been right. Power had forced her to reveal who she truly was. At that moment, Chairman Lee approached Mina and Junho carefully. "Mr. Kang," he greeted respectfully. Junho gave a slight nod, but Chairman Lee's attention quickly shifted toward Mina. "And you must be Mrs. Han." Mina smiled politely. "Please call me Mina." The chairman studied her for a moment before speaking. "You handled yourself impressively tonight." "She handled herself kindly," Junho corrected quietly. Chairman Lee chuckled softly. "Perhaps kinder than I would have." Mina noticed the old businessman's sharp eyes softening. "Greetings, I've heard many stories about your husband," he continued, "but never about you." "That's intentional," Junho said coldly. Chairman Lee raised both hands lightly. "Relax. I mean no disrespect." Then he looked back at Mina. "But now I understand why people close to Mr. Kang speak differently about him lately." Junho's gaze narrowed slightly. "Differently?" The chairman smiled knowingly. "They say Seoul's most feared man suddenly started donating to hospitals, paying employee debts, and funding scholarships." Mina slowly turned toward her husband. Junho looked away briefly. The chairman laughed quietly. "So the rumors were true." Mina folded her arms. "You never told me. Do dislike public attention. That doesn't mean you hide good things." Junho's voice lowered. "I didn't do it for recognition." Chairman Lee smiled. "Exactly why it matters." For a brief second, something almost shy crossed Junho's usually unreadable face. Mina couldn't help smiling softly. The chairman eventually excused himself, leaving them alone again. But the conversation lingered in Mina's mind. "You paid hospital debts?" she asked quietly. Junho sighed. "A few each." "How many is a few?" He remained silent. Mina's eyes widened slightly. "Junho." He finally muttered. 73. She stopped dancing entirely. "You paid 73 families' medical bills. It wasn't important." She stared at him in disbelief. "You also funded scholarships." He looked mildly uncomfortable now, which amused her deeply. "A small education program." "How small?" 3 universities. Mina burst into laughter. Several nearby guests looked shocked hearing it. The ruthless mafia boss watched his wife laugh with helpless affection. "You're impossible," she said. "You married me anyway." "That may have been my first mistake." His lips curved slightly. "Liar, da." Before she could respond, a nervous young waitress suddenly approached them. "Miss Han?" Mina immediately noticed the girl shaking. "Yes?" The waitress swallowed hard. I just wanted to thank you." Mina looked confused. "For what?" The girl's eyes became watery. "My brother works at one of the Kang shipping docks. When he got injured last year, your foundation paid for his surgery." Mina blinked in surprise. "My foundation?" Junho quietly cleared his throat. Mina turned slowly toward him again. You named it after me? The waitress smiled through tears. The Mina Foundation helped dozens of workers' families. Junho looked genuinely trapped now. You said you hated attention, he muttered defensively. Mina stared at him speechlessly. The waitress bowed repeatedly before hurrying away. For several seconds, Mina simply looked at her husband. You built an entire charity foundation without telling me. It wasn't relevant. She shook her head in disbelief. The whole city thinks you're a monster that keeps enemies cautious, but secretly you're helping strangers survive. Junho's expression darkened slightly. You think good deeds erase my sins? Her smile faded gently. No. The honesty surprised him. Mina touched his hand softly. But I think people are more complicated than the labels placed on them. For the first time that evening, silence settled naturally between them. Comfortably, truthfully, then suddenly crash. A loud sound echoed near the ballroom entrance. Several guests screamed. Security instantly moved forward. A drunken man stumbled inside yelling angrily, while shoving past guards. Where's Kang? Junho? The room froze again. The man's face was flushed with rage and alcohol. You ruined my business, he shouted. Security tried restraining him, but he kept fighting. You think money gives you the right to destroy people? Junho's expression turned cold instantly. But Mina noticed something strange. Fear, not in the room. In the man himself. Pure desperation. Wait, she said quietly. Security paused immediately. The man pointed shakily toward Junho. My company went bankrupt after your people cut ties with us. Junho recognized him. Director Choi? You destroyed my life, Junho answered calmly. You smuggled illegal weapons through my shipping routes without permission. The ballroom erupted into shocked whispers. Director Choi's face twisted desperately. I had debts. You endangered my workers. You still ruined me. Security moved closer again, but Mina stepped forward first. Junho grabbed her wrist gently. Stay back. But she shook her head. Then she looked directly at the trembling man. Do you have family? She asked softly. The question stunned him. A daughter, he admitted quietly. How old? 10. His anger visibly cracked at the mention of his child. Mina nodded slowly. She still needs her father. Director Choi lowered his eyes in shame. For several tense seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mina turned toward her husband. Can his daughter enter school safely if he goes to prison? Junho's jaw tightened slightly. No. And if he disappears, she'll lose everything. Director Choi stared at her in confusion. Why was she helping him? Mina looked back at the broken man. You made terrible choices. He nodded weakly. But desperation and evil are not always the same thing. Junho studied his wife silently. Then he sighed once. Director Choi. The man stiffened instantly. You will repay every debt owed through supervised labor contracts under Kang Logistics. Choi blinked in shock. What? You'll work legally. Every payment monitored. No weapons. No smuggling. The man looked stunned. You're sparing me? Junho's eyes remained cold. Number. My wife is. Tears suddenly filled Choi's eyes. He bowed deeply and repeatedly before security escorted him away peacefully. The ballroom remained silent again. Then one older guest quietly whispered, She just saved his life. Another answered softly, No. She saved his daughter's life. Junho looked at Mina carefully once the room settled again. You see good and dangerous people too easily. And you see monsters too quickly. Monsters exist. Yes, she replied softly. But sometimes wounded people simply make monstrous decisions. He stared at her thoughtfully. You really believe people can change? She smiled faintly. You did. For once, Kang Junho had absolutely no response. Hours later, the gala slowly began ending. Luxury cars lined outside the hotel entrance, while wealthy guests departed carefully under flashing cameras. Yet dozens of staff members quietly gathered near the lobby, not for celebrities, for Mina. The cleaners, servers, cooks, assistants, and receptionists all wanted to say goodbye. Some hugged her warmly, others simply bowed gratefully. Vanessa watched the scene secretly from a distance, before finally approaching slowly. This time, no arrogance remained in her face. Only exhaustion. I spent years buying fake friendships, she admitted quietly. You earned real loyalty without trying. Mina looked at her calmly. Respect given only to power appears when power fades. Vanessa nodded weakly. My father said tonight was the first time he's ever been ashamed of me. The words sounded painfully honest. For a moment, Mina saw not a cruel socialite, but a deeply insecure woman raised to believe cruelty meant superiority. I hope you change, Mina said softly. Vanessa gave a small broken smile. I think tonight forced me to. Then, surprisingly, She bowed respectfully, before walking away into the night. Junho stepped beside his wife as the hotel entrance finally quieted. You still gave her mercy. Mina rested her head lightly against his shoulder. Maybe because nobody ever gave me any. The city lights glowed outside like endless stars. Black luxury vehicles waited beside the curb, while armed guards kept their distance respectfully. But for one peaceful moment, the feared mafia boss ignored the entire world. He simply wrapped his arm carefully around the woman who had changed him. And standing beneath the golden lights of the Grand Seoul Royale Hotel, Kang Junho realized something terrifyingly simple. Every enemy he had ever faced knew how dangerous he was, but only Mina understood how fragile his heart became when it belonged to her. Rain began falling softly over Seoul as the black convoy moved through the glowing city streets. Water slid down the windows of Kang Junho's armored car, while the city lights blurred into gold and crimson reflections across the glass. Inside the vehicle, silence rested comfortably between Mina and her husband. Not awkward silence, peaceful silence. The kind only two people deeply connected could share. Junho loosened his tie slightly while watching the rain outside. Across from them sat two bodyguards, pretending not to listen to anything happening in the back seat. Mina noticed one of them secretly staring at her stained wine cuff again. You can stop worrying, she said gently. I survived. The younger guard nearly jumped. Sorry ma'am. Junho's mouth twitched faintly. The older guard cleared his throat awkwardly. The staff were angry after what happened tonight. Mina blinked. Angry? Several workers wanted permission to throw Miss Sinclair out themselves. Mina looked surprised. The younger guard nodded quickly. One chef actually picked up a frying pan. A quiet laugh escaped her. Junho finally spoke. You're loved more than you realize. She leaned back against the leather seat thoughtfully. That still feels strange sometimes. Why? Because for most of my life, people looked at me and saw a problem before they saw a person. The guards lowered their eyes respectfully. Mina rarely spoke about her past. Even Junho remained silent, listening carefully. I grew up hearing the same things repeatedly, she continued softly. Too dark, too foreign, too poor. Eventually you start wondering if maybe the world is right. Junho's expression hardened immediately. But Mina gently touched his hand before his anger could surface. Then one day, she whispered, a terrifying Korean gangster walked into my wine bar and asked me about red wine like it was the meaning of life. The younger bodyguard accidentally snorted before quickly pretending to cough. Junho gave him a cold look through the mirror. Careful. Sorry boss. Mina smiled warmly. You were strange back then. I still am. That's true. The car finally slowed as the massive gates of the Han estate opened automatically ahead of them. Guards bowed as the convoy entered the private property. The mansion stood overlooking the river, elegant yet intimidating beneath the stormy night sky. Most people in Seoul called it the Dragon House. Not because of its architecture, because everyone feared the man living inside it. As soon as the car stopped, servants hurried forward with umbrellas. But before anyone could open Mina's door, Junho stepped out first, and personally held the umbrella over her himself. The servants immediately looked downward respectfully. Even after years of marriage, seeing the feared mafia boss care for someone so openly still shocked them. Inside the mansion, warmth wrapped around them instantly. Fireplaces glowed softly while staff moved quietly through the halls. An elderly woman entered from the kitchen carrying tea. Welcome home. Mina smiled immediately. Miss Park. The old housekeeper set the tea tray down before fussing over Mina's stained sleeve. That horrible woman ruined your cuff. It's only fabric. Mrs. Park looked offended. It was silk. Mina laughed softly. The old woman then noticed Junho watching silently nearby. And you, she scolded him suddenly. Why didn't you stop it sooner? The bodyguards instantly looked terrified. Nobody spoke to Kang Junho that way, except Mrs. Park. Junho sighed like a tired child. I arrived late. She handled herself. Mrs. Park crossed her arms. That's not the point. Mina hid a smile behind her teacup. Years ago, when Junho's parents died, Mrs. Park had practically raised him herself, which meant she feared absolutely nothing about him, including his reputation. You work too much, she continued nagging, and your wife keeps defending you. I'm sitting right here, Mina reminded gently. Yes, and you spoil him. Junho muttered something in Korean under his breath. Mrs. Park gasped dramatically. Did you hear that disrespect? Mina burst into laughter again. For a moment, the terrifying atmosphere surrounding the Dragon House disappeared completely. It almost felt normal. Almost. Then, one of Junho's men, entered the room quietly. Boss. The mood changed instantly. Junho stood. What is it? The northern warehouse situation. That Mina noticed the subtle tension in the guard's face. Something serious. Junho nodded once. Office. 10 minutes. The guard bowed and left. Mina slowly placed her teacup down. Trouble? N. Other important. She gave him a look. He sighed softly. A rival group crossed into Busan territory. And they attacked one of our shipments. Mina's expression darkened slightly. Violence was the one part of Junho's world she never fully accepted, not because she was naive, because she understood exactly how dangerous it truly was. You'll handle it personally. It wasn't a question. Junho loosened his cuffs slowly. They want my attention, and if you ignore them, they'll mistake restraint for weakness. Mina looked away briefly toward the rain outside. This was the reality of loving a man like him. No matter how gentle he became with her, the world surrounding him remained dangerous. Bloody, merciless. Junho stepped closer quietly. You hate this life? She looked back at him carefully. No, she answered honestly. I hate what this life forces you to become sometimes. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his face. You should have married someone safer. Mina smiled sadly. But not someone else. The room fell silent. Mrs. Park quietly left without interrupting. Even the servants understood moments like this deserved praise. Privacy. Junho rested his forehead lightly against hers. You make me weak. No, she whispered gently. I make you human. His eyes closed briefly. Because deep down, that frightened him more than enemies ever could. Loving someone meant having something to lose. And Kang Junho had spent most of his life surviving by losing nothing. An hour later, Mina stood alone on the balcony outside their bedroom watching the storm grow heavier over Seoul. Thunder rolled through the distant skyline, while cold wind moved through her hair. Behind her, the office doors downstairs slammed open loudly. Voices echoed faintly. Angry voices. She recognized one immediately. Junho. Mina rarely heard him lose control emotionally, which meant something serious had happened. A few minutes later, footsteps approached quickly behind her. Junho emerged onto the balcony, his expression dark and dangerous. What happened? He stayed silent too long. Her stomach tightened. Junho. One of our men was killed tonight. The rain suddenly felt colder. How? Execution style. Mina's chest hurt instantly. Not because she knew the man personally, because she knew what death did to Junho internally. Every loss hardened him further, pulled him deeper into darkness. She stepped closer slowly. Who was he? Kim Da-yoon. She remembered immediately. The quiet guard who always bowed shyly whenever she visited the docks. He had shown her pictures of his newborn son, only 2 weeks earlier. Oh no! Junho's jaw tightened violently. They murdered him in front of witnesses. Mina saw it then. The rage. Cold, controlled, terrifying. The same darkness the entire underworld feared. You want revenge. I want justice. She held his gaze carefully. In your world, those become the same thing. Lightning flashed across the sky. Junho turned away toward the city lights. When I was younger, I believed fear solved everything. And now, I know fear only creates more fear. Mina stepped beside him quietly. But you still carry the responsibility. Yes, because if you don't respond, more people die. His silence confirmed it. This was the cruel reality outsiders never understood about organized power. Violence often continued because weakness invited predators. Junho rubbed his eyes tiredly. Hyun's son won't even remember. His father's face. Mina's heart broke hearing the pain beneath his calm voice. She gently took his hand. What will you do? His eyes became unreadable again. What I must. The next morning, news spread across Seoul about tensions rising between rival criminal organizations. Businesses closed early. Rumors moved through the city like wildfire. Meanwhile, Mina visited the docks alone. Rows of workers immediately bowed respectfully as she arrived, not because they feared her, because they trusted her. Dayun's widow sat quietly inside a small office near the shipping yard, holding her sleeping baby against her chest. She looked exhausted, broken. Mina sat beside her silently for several minutes before speaking. He talked about you constantly. The widow's eyes filled instantly. He was proud of this little boy. A trembling smile appeared on the grieving woman's face. He wanted him to become a doctor. Mina carefully touched the baby's tiny hand. He still can. The widow looked confused. Mina handed her an envelope gently. Inside were legal documents, financial accounts, and property papers. What is this? Your family's future. The widow's hands shook violently. This is too much, not charity. Tears rolled down the woman's cheeks. It's loyalty, Mina whispered. Your husband protected people for years. Now we protect his family. Outside the office, workers quietly watched through the windows. And for the first time in a long time, many of them understood why even hardened criminals would follow Kang Junho, without hesitation, not because he inspired fear, because he never abandoned his own people. That evening, Mina returned home, to find the mansion unusually quiet, too quiet. One guard approached immediately. The boss hasn't returned yet. Her stomach tightened instantly. Where is he? The guard hesitated, which answered everything. Somewhere dangerous. Rain poured heavily again as midnight approached. Mina sat alone in the dark living room waiting. Every passing minute stretched painfully. Then finally headlights appeared beyond the gates. The front doors opened moments later. Junho entered covered in rain and silence. His white shirt carried faint blood stains near the sleeve. Mina stood immediately. Are you hurt? No. But his eyes looked empty. That frightened her more. She walked toward him slowly. What happened? For several seconds, he said nothing. Then quietly, it's over. She noticed his trembling hands. Very slight, but enough. You killed them. A question. Junho closed his eyes briefly. Yes. The room felt unbearably heavy. Mina understood this part of him existed, but seeing the aftermath always hurt, because every act of violence carved another scar into his soul whether he admitted it or not. You hated doing it. He laughed bitterly. Hate stopped mattering years ago. That's not true. His voice suddenly sharpened. You think men like me survive by staying gentle? No, she answered softly. I think men like you survive by convincing themselves they no longer feel anything. That hit harder than anger, because it was true. Junho looked away. I did what was necessary. I know. And you still hate it. He stared at her silently, then finally whispered the truth he never admitted to anyone else. Every time I become that person again, I'm afraid you'll stop loving me. Mina's eyes softened instantly. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him despite the blood, the rain, and darkness clinging to him. You idiot, she whispered. For a second, the feared Mafia boss nearly broke completely. His hands gripped her tightly like she was the only thing keeping him together. And maybe she was. Because in a world built on violence, betrayal and fear, Mina remained the one place Kang Junho still believed redemption might exist.